Emma, hello. She is a screenwriter, writer, actor. She's a dame. She's one of the most cherished actors of her generation, and many of you will know her for amazing performances like Last Chance Harvey, Saving Mr. Banks, The Children Act, or those lesser known films like, Love Actually or Harry Potter. But she's also a truly, truly impactful activist. She and I met about, I guess, 11 years ago. I had just been handed the job of the CEO of a huge global humanitarian organization called ActionAid. And Emma was its ambassador. And she invited me over for a cup of tea. And we talked about the possibility of going to Liberia in West Africa. There was a new female president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and ActionAid was doing some pretty phenomenal programming on women's rights. And she said, "Leah, let's go. And can I bring my son, Tindy?" And so Emma, Tindy, and I set off to Liberia. Tindy is Emma's adopted son. He's a former child soldier from Rwanda, and this was his first trip back to Africa, actually. And we traveled these very dusty, potholed roads to village, and we were having amazing conversations with women and girls about, escaping brutal violence and poverty. And I think it's there that our friendship was sown. And she's the best kind of friend, right? She's the kind of friend that has a clean bed and a delicious glass of wine after the end of a brutal 12-hour global meeting full of conflict or a transcontinental flight. She's the kind of friend that always has the best book and, of course, film recommendations. She's the kind of friend that knows when it's time to book ourselves into a health spa. The one where we both got diagnosed as metabolically obese and laughed our heads off and spent the evenings in sweaty saunas trying to deal with our stress. But God bless you for your belief in the radical nature of self-care. She's the kind of friend that insists on taking the top bunk when I have a bad back on our ship tour up to the Arctic with Greenpeace. We did 2 of them, bringing along her daughter, amazing daughter Gaia, as we try to bring global attention to climate change. But Em, you're the kind of friend that makes me more courageous. You make all of us more courageous, and that is why we wanted you to be part of the conversation. So how are you doing?
Oh, thank you. That was a wonderful and slightly alarming introduction. But I must say, I just adored the all that stuff at the beginning was just so great, and what a great soundtrack. And we need that connection of organizations all over the world. I think that's something that you and I have felt passionately about for a long, long time. It's so exciting to see all those organizations coming together and being held and helped and supported by such an organization as this. It's fantastically inspiring.
Yeah. I mean, when you think back on some of our trips, the trip to Liberia was quite transformative for both of us. Do you remember anything that really was transformative for you?
Oh, so much. I mean, Liberia was, if you remember, I mean, it's the most traumatized country on the face of the planet. I mean, they've had war there, the most dreadful wars for so long. And actually, looking at one of your introductory pieces, it was the women in that country who all came together dressed in white and prevented the re-election of one of the psychopaths who was about to get into power. So that was a real connection in my mind from all those years ago. And then meeting the woman who ran ActionAid there, who was a fantastic... Corto, amazing. Married to one of the only doctors in the country. And And one of the many people, actually, I think it's 60% of the population, have seen a family member being murdered. And in her case, it was her father. She had the courage and just the wisdom of a million people. She was extraordinary. And it was with her that we went, whenever you do an Action Aid trip, it's very interesting because the people on the ground are always from that country. So you're working with people from that country. It's not just a lot of white people in Woolies being nice and colonial. So we turned up and we had a fascinating afternoon with a lot of ex-child soldiers who, of course, were fascinated by Tindy. Because he was having made a life for himself in a different country, and there they were, not able to move forward because the president, the first female president in Africa, because Graça Machel very sensibly earlier said to me in another Action Aid trip, why would I do that? I'd never get anything done. And that's the nature of power, which is something we've really got to talk about. But that was so touching to see these boys, these young men who'd been consistently refused any kind of asylum or forgiveness for their part, which was never chosen as child soldiers. You're just kidnapped and forced into a militia. So watching Tindy with them was amazing. And then going to meet this woman who was still rushing around this incredibly poor country that still imports all its food, doesn't even grow food, in a sort of massive motorcade. And she
President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, yes. And her sort of response to us, which was chilly, really, to say the least. Fair enough. She was more interested in Corto also, and in the photograph of my husband in the Book of Sense and Sensibility, which I'd brought her as a kind of courtesy, you know. She just looked at it and then reappraised me, should we say, having not been very
done quite well on that catch. Yeah.
Yeah, and we weren't allowed to go in with trousers, or at least that's what they told us. They said there's a no trouser rule. I'm going, hang on, you have a woman who is president, she never wears trousers? That's okay. So we searched through our belongings, and we didn't have anything that wasn't trousers. So we tried to disguise the trousers by wrapping various bits of cloth around them. But that was a meeting I shan't ever forget.
Right. Yeah, that's
she was
right.
a World Bank bird. She was someone who wasn't connecting at all. And that was really very interesting to me, because I was ready to be super impressed. And all I found was someone who was completely closed.
Yeah. I mean, you and I share several things in common. One of them is the fact that we both have had very loving
sexual history. No, I'm
very, very loving fathers. Yes. Very tough, very smart mothers. We both have sisters, just sisters. Did that form part of your feminism? I know it formed part of mine. Where did your feminism come from?
Well, my mother worked, so it was clear that women worked. And when my father died quite young, my sister left school at 16 and went straight into work. And when my father died, we all had to work, because we all had to go straight into work. I think that work was a very powerful influencer. But I would say that the lights really switched on with my feminism was when I realized that there was actually a different way of interpreting literature, because I studied literature, and the discovery of feminist literary criticism changed the way in which I saw the entire world, because I realized that the authoritative voices that I had been brought up with, and particularly at university at Cambridge, all of the literary critics, the great literary critics, were men. Yeah. And I suddenly read this extraordinary book called The Mad Woman in the Attic by Gilbert and Gubar, I think their names are. And I suddenly realized that it was possible to interpret the works of George Eliot, or at the time, Charlotte Bronte, through a completely different lens. And it was one of the most inspiring things that has ever happened to me. And I never, ever looked back. Every time I saw something and heard a voice in authority that was male, I thought, I bet there's another side to this.
Right. Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so, to your activism, I mean, one of the things that I admire so much about you is your really good sense of your role, right? You have put your body, your voice, your time behind so many critical issues, whether it's, you know, refugees, whether it's tuberculosis, whether it's women's rights, whether it's climate change, whether it's, you know, torture. And you're very driven by this kind of sense of purpose. Where did that come from?
Honestly, I'm not entirely sure, but it's been from childhood, being unable to bear injustice or cruelty in particular. And I can't identify it further than the feelings of being a child and knowing when something was wrong and trying to put it right. And I would say, I'm sure there are a lot of women listening to us talk who have that same desire. Sometimes you have to kind of make it sit down a little bit, because it's like a kind of great pull. You have to do something, you have to do something right now. And sometimes it's the wrong time to do something. You have to find the right way in which to act. And I suppose that's been my learning curve all my life. How do I use my voice? How do I get myself into a position where I'm well enough informed in a deep enough way actually to be useful, instead of just making a noise about something that I feel passionately about, but I'm not really well versed enough in. That's very important.
Right. I mean, because you've chosen things where you've had a experience, credibility, where you're knowledgeable, or where you're telling stories. I mean, let's talk about climate change. You and I see the very clear connection between women's rights and climate change, but a lot of climate science is highly technical. It's very masculinized in terms of, you know, talking about the science and the numbers. And that's, I think, intimidated a lot of people to actually figure out how to get involved. I mean, you've been able to talk about it in very human ways, right? Like how, well, I guess to these people that are listening, how is it that we can explain the urgency of climate change and how it relates to women's rights? How have you been so successful at doing so?
I don't know whether I have been, but I think that I worked out quite a long time ago that everything is connected. Yeah. Everything.
Yeah.
You know, there is no, we work in these, particularly NGOs actually work in these sort of silos. And I can remember doing some work during the Kosovan wars, when there were so many rape camps and a lot of women were coming over, and I was trying to raise money, my favorite thing, and working with a newspaper here, and realizing that all these organizations weren't really connecting and talking to one another, which is why this is so important, conversing and connecting and realizing that anything to do with climate, because of course resources, climate is all about, you know, how are we going to continue to sustain life for us and for all the other creatures we merely are sharers of this planet with. We're not better than, we're sharing this home with many millions of other species, many of whom we've destroyed. So how do we change that? And I think one of the things I remember realizing when we were in the Arctic about the male or toxic male view of the planet was the attitude to the Arctic, because the Arctic, especially when entered by Captain Scott, was described as this terrible place and you've got to conquer it. It's like you've got to conquer Everest. Everything's got to be conquered, you know, like Canada, like, you know, we have a history of conquering, and that's very masculine. It's very male. It's all about power, taking power, controlling and keeping it. And the Arctic is not a terrible place. It's in fact an incredibly fragile and vulnerable environment. And learning about that, the fact that it was fragile, and realizing that I had listened to all this nonsense for years and years. Well, I had known the story of Captain Scott and how he, died in this terrible place instead of having made a pretty stupid decision and some very bad decisions about how he organized himself in order to prove something about himself.
Right.
And so that suddenly realizing the Arctic is a place of immeasurable fragility, that is disappearing fast, connects up with everything to do with our work with women. We're all extremely fragile, actually. All human beings are beautifully complex, fragile creatures. And the forms of power in which we've lived have not served any of us, actually, including men. You know, this control, take control, inhabit, and then keep the power is a very messed up model, and that's something that we have to challenge. That's the most difficult thing to undo. Right. But we can, and I've been thinking about it a lot actually recently, and thinking about the fact that we have to create new ways and show them and be them. You have to be powerful in sustainable ways, and that's about connection, empathy, about wisdom, and it's the thing that women have been doing for centuries, right. And not recognized for it.
Yeah, right. And you know, the role of kind of sisterhood in dismantling patriarchy through, that empathic, much more showing vulnerability as strength, and all of the things that you and I talk about. I mean, you were in the center of, when Me Too started hitting, and talking about conquerors and Harvey Weinstein, and what was going on there. And you quit films, you brought the women together on film crews to actually have conversations about what was going on. Do you feel there's been a seismic shift in Hollywood? Do you think things have changed? Tell us a little bit about what was going on and what's going on now.
They've changed a little bit. They have changed a little bit on the surface. I mean, you're not going to find crews making the same sort of comments and remarks to young runners and actresses as you did, perhaps. It's not changing very fast, I have to say. And Harvey Weinstein was like a huge, great boulder that someone lifted up, and there everything was. And I did an interview on Newsnight, and I remember very brilliant journalist Emily Maitlis going, so how has this been allowed to happen? And I just said, don't you understand? This is the world as it is. This is what everyone puts up with. And we've been putting up with it for centuries. Yeah. But men have felt that they have the right to just take. And women have not had jurisdiction over their own bodies. This is normal. This is the normal. And now everyone's going, oh, isn't this awful? You go, so that's what I found shocking about it. That instead of the sort of superstructure, should we say, of our culture going, okay, it's time to change this. There was no sense of, oh my God, this is reality for most women on a floor where there are a lot of men, wherever you are, in an office. This is the reality. And I think that conversation is continuing, of course, as it has to, and it has to move into absolutely every area, into every sector, into every, I mean, when we think about, for instance, going to Myanmar, which was an extraordinary trip that we made, that's where you find this, what is now known as intersectionality, where you realize that our experience as white women who've had education and access to a protected place in which we can speak without being hit over the head.
Jail, yeah.
Then going to Myanmar and suddenly realizing that they were just at the beginning of finding their voice, these women. Do you remember that women's conference we went to?
Yeah.
Extraordinary. And yet there was a historian, an old lady who was a historian, who pointed out that in the ancient marbles of Myanmar, there were depictions of women leaders in marketplaces, and women who ran banks, and in their ancient history. It's very interesting, isn't it, how matriarchy has been just forgotten about, but it's been there, and now's the time for its return, because without it we're not going to, the planet won't survive, full stop.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to
the planet will survive, we won't survive.
That's right. Well, and I think we had probably one of our most hilarious, like kick each other under the table moments. So when we went to Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi had literally just got out of house arrest. It was like this moment of history. We arrived, people were showing her pictures in public. This had never been heard of. And ActionAid had this incredible women's program, youth program. And we were invited by the British High Commissioner to meet Aung San Suu Kyi in his home. And we were just, you know, beside ourselves, this opportunity to meet Aung San Suu Kyi. And so we sat down at this table with, you know, Burmese historians and human rights activists. It was a very, you know, secret meeting. And there was Aung San Suu Kyi, and we were going to have this conversation about the way forward for the country. And the British High Commissioner was just beside himself because he was meeting Dame Emmatomson. And he went through this long introduction where he wanted to go through in painful detail the scene in Love Actually, his favorite scene where you cried. And we were just like, what? Okay, this might be your moment, buddy, but you know, we are here to talk about, I mean, you have those moments all the time, but it was really, you know, Aung San Suu Kyi so patiently listening to this diplomat. Yeah,
it was, I think, one of the women in Myanmar who told that story about power, which I thought was one of the most revealing things I'd ever heard. We were in these, it was in Myanmar, wasn't it? Was she Rohingya? Because yes. We met these two extraordinary Rohingya women who'd made a journey of such horror to get to the fellowship that they were, where they were just on a bus at night, and the bus broke down, and because they were two women on their own without men, they had to just hold on to each other, because the men just circled around the bus and just took their dicks out. And I mean, it was just the story of their journey was so terrible. And again, you know, the scales, you just look at the world and think, oh my God, what do they have to put up with? Anyway, there was this extraordinary woman in this herb garden who told me a story which became in my mind a kind of emblem of how power, which of course exists and must be used, but is being used in all the wrong ways. And this was an exemplar of someone who knew what to do. And actually she was doing it in order to protect herself. But she said she was a great herbalist. And so she was able to help women in childbirth with all sorts of conditions. And she knew all the plants and she knew what to do with them. And I said, that's extraordinary. And I actually said to her that must give you an awful lot of power in your community, does it not? And she said, well, that's where I'm very careful. She said, what I do is I take the people, whatever condition that they have, I take them to the plant. I point at the plant, I point it out, I make sure they know what plant it is, and then I say, this is what you do. You pick the leaves, she describes, she makes the recipe, she gives it to them, and they do it. And I said, that's very interesting. Why do you do that? And she said, because if I gained all that power, I would become the subject possibly of envy, possibly of violence, possibly. And this is true of all forms of power, surely.
Yeah. Oh, she must be a witch.
She understood how to access her knowledge, share it with other people without gaining power over them. This is key to our development, to human development, that we are able to understand how to organize ourselves sustainably. And that is to say, we have to have influence over large groups of people, but we don't control them. We don't use that influence in in baleful ways, which unfortunately we do at the moment. We don't want the power for ourselves, is what I mean.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you and I have gotten into some trouble, right? Where we've used our feminism to step up and to try to, you know, call out or call in, you know, patriarchy, and the boys have been unhappy with us. You know, you've had some brutal media coverage. I mean, you know, those are dark moments where you just want to just crawl into a hole. I mean, how do you find the courage? How do you and I have, you know, cried over some bottles of wine through some of that, but how do you when they really come after you, what do?
I ring you, basically. I mean, I will always go to female friends and say, look, this has happened, and I said that it's been misinterpreted, or, you know, I've been stupid, or I will always go to women, especially if it's been about feminism, about equality, about all of that, about climate even. Yeah, absolutely. You know, you have to be able to endure, actually. And God knows we have met many, many examples of women who've had to endure far more. You know, as yet, I've never had an experience of having my livelihood taken away from me, for instance, which I think is a lot in many countries where women speak out. So being aware of that as well, and you suddenly, again, it's always just reminding yourself that there are all these other experiences going on, and they're all connected. They're all connected.
It's so systemic.
All of those experiences would have been ours here 200 years ago.
Yeah,
absolutely, all of them. There isn't a single one from Myanmar to Liberia to Mozambique to South Africa, wherever we've been.
Yeah,
everything I've seen existed here.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, it's so systemic, and I, you know, certainly, I think that's what drives you, is that we know what violence, what poverty looks like, what the kinds of, you know, brutal attacks, the disenfranchisement, the gaslighting that happens to women leaders. And, you know, you call for this, you know, new form of leadership, you know, this kind of empathic, you know, connection. How do we say this community that's here, that's listening to us? How do you start it? How do you build it? How do you step into your power? How do you do that?
When I was younger, one of the first things I did when I was about, I don't know, 28 or something, I started a women's group to talk. And the first question I asked this group of about 20 women, lots of different ages, mostly in the arts, not all actors. My question was, who's the female hero? What's female heroism? What is female heroic action? Really interesting, because 30 years later, actually, one of the answers has just come into my life in the form of the first Black head teacher of a primary school. It happened to be my primary school. But going back to the women's group, what was interesting to me about it was that at the end of these afternoons, we would have them at my mother's house. She lives opposite, in her flat, and we'd all sit around for 4 hours and we would talk. We would take a subject. One of the subjects, for instance, was food. Another was mothers. Another was money. Another was government and politics. And Glenda Jackson came and talked to us. Germaine Greer came and talked to us. But it was very interesting. But the thing is, what's almost not so much as much the talk was the sense of solidarity and being together. And everyone said that at the end of those meetings, they felt so much more powerful and so much better, actually. So I really recommend that. And I keep doing it. I keep having women only events. And that's very old-fashioned in some ways, but it's important to me, actually, and I think it's still necessary. I don't think we're so far ahead that we don't need, in a very real way, to be together in a place where we can speak to one another without being misinterpreted or having to explain ourselves. Or it's just such bliss talking to another feminist as well, who understands what you mean when you say sod the patriarchy. And it's just such a relief,
Yeah,
you know, not have to explain yourself again and again and again. And well, they're not all bad. And you know what I mean? It's just,
yeah,
just saying, yes, this is how it is.
yeah. So, you know, the Equality Fund is also, I think, really trying to kind of build that global community. And, you know, the video shows all these amazing, amazing women.
And they need money. That's the other thing. They need money. So the last couple of years, money I've been giving to a group called Activate here, who support women who want to go into politics. And women can't afford to go into politics.
Yeah.
No, they don't have the money.
Yeah.
We have to remember that. It's really hard, really, really hard. So
that's right. So if you're not courageous to be out there in the media, you know, women need to be giving their money and stretching as much as they can to give what they can, and to have some of these really challenging conversations with one another about how to shift power, how power needs to be much more inclusive and empathic, where there's kind of space for laughter and joy and vulnerability. And
we have to have sort of subtle strategies as well. Like all those wonderful women who in business meetings have got an actual, he's doing number one now. They've got actual names for the ways in which men want to shut you down, because they will in our world. They want to shut you down, and they'll be able to say, oh, it's number two. There's all sorts of ways in which women are getting together to in the same way as women in a rural village in South Africa, when they heard that one of their sisters in the next house was being beaten, they would all come out of their house and bang their saucepans outside. And they would make a collective action to protect one of their, but that requires organization. It requires talking and planning, and that's very important as well. And I would always give young women in particular a place in which to speak and say what's been happening. Because on the set of a film I did quite recently, I mean, I was on set all the time, and so people are pretty well behaved. But I heard later from one of our runners at a meeting with all the women afterwards, she said, yeah, but you know, whenever you just walked off to get a coffee, the guy who was in charge of this department would come up and say, oh, I just really feel like tickling you, Molly. Just that kind of strange sort of flirting that's not really flirting, is utterly inappropriate in a workplace, and undermines and undermines and undermines. Now, in order to fight that, you absolutely have to have allies on the floor. You can't, you know, just saying it to someone in the pub later isn't enough. You have to be able to go to someone right there. So if you're older and you have money, you protect those women around you, protect young women in particular, by being there for them and letting them know that you see them.
Yeah. Well, here's a question. I'm starting to go to some of the questions that have come in, and it's really about your daughter and how did you first tell her about feminism? How did she become aware of it?
She was always at supper, so she's always been at dinner, and we made dinner time a very important time. And we also we have dinner very early because we've been having it early since she was tiny, and so she heard an awful lot of people talking about this all the way through her childhood, which is kind of the best way. So osmotically, I would say. And then she started asking her own questions.
It's osmotically up through osmosis. Yeah. Okay. Word of the day. Wonderful.
Yeah. It might be wrong. It might. I could easily have made it up, Joe. You know what I'm like. Anyway, I think it anyway, never mind, good word. So she will have picked that up and she'll have heard all our conversations.
Oh, yeah.
And so now she's terrifying, actually. She's
No,
absolutely terrifying.
she's an incredible feminist now, isn't
So
she? Yeah.
yeah, and so articulate and teaches me all the time.
Yeah.
She's been through it as well, you know.
Oh yeah, she's been through it. She's been through it. You know, we very much recognize our privilege, you know, as well off and speaking English and able-bodied and be able to travel the world on a passport that lets us into countries that most people can't. And, you know, you've been wanting to make sure that your voice and your body and your storytelling has meaning and makes a difference. But how do you know how to get out of the way, right? How do you know how to use your privilege in a way that is actually ensuring that the issues or the people are actually being centered?
Well, it's, you do what the garden lady does. Same thing. You know, you say, you people come together, it's gonna be great. And maybe here's some ideas. And then you just walk away. I mean, for instance, a practical example, this thing about heroism and female heroism, which is of course to do with everyday actions actually, and not the great big actions, the grand geste of the male romantic hero. It's all about all the tiny little things that women do every day that comprise female heroism and that are endless and extraordinary. But this woman came along, a book, Black Teacher it's called, and she was a part of the Windrush generation, and she turned up here in London in the late 50s. And her account of the racism and the kind of racism that she encountered, whilst being one of the greatest educationalists, clearly, who ever walked the earth, then becoming the first Black female primary school head teacher here at my primary school, I suddenly thought, there she is. That's the heroine I've been looking for, someone who is up against, you know, sort of mind-boggling levels of ignorance, fear and hatred. And actually, to be honest, and that's kind of where women are. We are up against quite weirdly mind-boggling levels of hatred and misogyny, in systemic hatred and misogyny that's been very well written about by people far cleverer than I am at identifying it and putting it into words. But there she was and she was Black in a white community, in a working class community as well. And her capacity to understand, particularly the children, and allow them to make the connections that they needed to make, and then have them come from far away right back towards her and become this, and she became famous in our country. And I don't know her story yet. So I took the story to the film company and said, this needs to be made. I can't make it. I'm white. So let's with some great young black writers, and I can help a bit, you know, we can talk. So I can, if they want assist, you know, any kind of input, they can have it. So that's the way. I mean, that's the thing I've done recently that I think describes what you mean.
Completely. Yeah. And I mean, it's also, that's the wonderful thing about getting old, right? I feel like that energy, that striving energy, I don't have to have that in my day. You know, I have a little quote on my bulletin board that says, joy is not in the self-promotion, it's in the homecoming. You know, it's just, you know,
as well, there's also great joy in being part of a large movement. That's very joyful, where you're just holding on to one another and you're receiving this wonderful energy from these other women next to you, in front of you, around you. This is all also to me very, very joyful,
Yeah.
which this conversation is reaching out, you know, to Vidya and Janelle and everyone around us. That is how we will change things. We don't, that's exactly right, because the whole power thing is to do with self-promotion. You know, you want this all for yourself. As soon as you want it for yourself, it's over.
That's
It's
right.
over. But at the same time, we're dealing with women who say, yes, but we've got to get women into positions of power. But it depends how you get there and then how you use it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing you do, I mean, it's you do, well, post-COVID, pre-COVID, and before times, you would do this thing called the pointless party. You would, you know, incredible. You'd rent this amazing place and you'd invite the most incredibly interesting people from every single walk of life, hire this amazing band, you know, open bar, and people would just, you know, you would just let them in there and just meet one another. And it was just this incredible methodology to ensure connection. Because of course you're meeting amazing, interesting, you know, philanthropists, activists, actors, writers all the time, and you throw them into this space, and of course everybody wants to go to the pointless party. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you do. You kind of create this, you know, this platform, this very, very safe space for creative and political interconnection. I should get back to, there's lots of questions coming in, and I should be getting to them.
We'll dance at the pointless party while she looks for a question. You all need to know. Look for your question. Focus, Joe. And I'm just saying to everyone, the audience, apart from anything else, how wonderful to be speaking to you. But the actual point of the pointless party is to dance.
Yeah.
I really recommend dancing, especially if you're an activist. It's really helpful, just saying.
Here's a good one. How do you speak up to the men in your life about these women? Sorry. How do you speak up to the men in your life about these issues that we face as women? So how do you talk to the guys? How do you tell them that this is wrong without them, you know, getting defensive? How do you help them see it from another perspective?
Well, it depends who. It just depends who. And also, I'm actually quite, now because I'm old, I'm quite sort of brutal.
Yeah.
I don't really soft soap anything. I'm quite clear.
Yeah.
That's not on. Obviously, that's not going to be happening. You're not going to be doing any of that, are you? No, of course not. Because you're a normal human being. It's that kind of thing. I mean, I don't really. You've got to. Sometimes I have to. I don't know whether any of you have this, but my son and my husband are quite bored with hearing about feminism.
Okay. Well, because they're feminists, right?
Quite bored. Well, are they? Are they though? I mean, I have been really tough on them, you know, sometimes, and I think they probably, you know, of course they are. Of course they are internally.
They know what to say. They know what to say, but they don't always do the right thing.
They know what to say so that I don't hit them around the head with a frying pan. Yeah, they do. But also they know the ins and outs as well. They've spent enough time listening, and it's a good question, but it's a difficult, because I don't quite know which men in what.
Well, one thing I say, I mean, so when Me Too was hitting Hollywood, I was in Greenpeace, and you know, Greenpeace is like full of like macho silverbacks. That's what they're known, you know, just these gorgeous hunking sailors and activists, and yes, gorgeous. And all of a sudden, you know, surprise, surprise, we're hearing about all of this sexual abuse that had been happening on ships, and all of these, you know, all of these actions and all of this. And I was one of the few feminists in leadership, and all of the country directors just came running to me. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And it's just like, no. I did not come to Greenpeace to sort you boys all out around feminism. I came to tackle climate change, and this is what I'm here to do. So here's some readings,
Yeah.
right? Here are some conversations that you need to start having with other men and with your colleagues. This is the work.
Yes.
This is the work. And this isn't the work that you just do 9 to 5. No. This is the work that you do for the planet. The planet. It's the work. It's the work. You know, it's the work that we need. It's the work that we need to do to transform the world. It's not just the work that you need to say, oh, yes, I've now read, you know, White Fragility, or I've,
yes,
or, I've read Lean In, or God Help Us, Lean In. Yeah.
Yes, ticking the little box, because they're, bless them, of course, they're so vulnerable. Their egos are so terribly vulnerable so much of the time. They just can't take any criticism at all. I mean, we're famously not able to take criticism, which is absolute bollocks, actually. It's men who can't take criticism. They can't take criticism, often can't cope with being told that they're not very good. So, obviously we're being a little bit general and a tiny bit naughty. But nonetheless, I'm afraid I mean that. I've come across it too many times for too many decades not to know that it's often very true. And so you're right. You'd say, this is not my job. You need to go and just do some thinking and look around and have some conversations. Right. But it's a very good question, because it's extremely hard.
Yeah.
At the moment, and they're so resentful. There's so much resentment and so much rage, and of course, we haven't talked about the net and the web, and which is a whole other world.
And I think there is also a conversation you and I have had often. There is a role to play in being incredibly empathic, incredibly filled with love for so many, particularly young men, that feel so disenfranchised right now, and that there is a lot of focus on women's leadership, and, and that these men are feeling left behind. And so how do we, what's that?
They need to lean in, that dreadful Sandberg thing, lean in, forget it. Don't do that. No.
But there is a role for some of us to actually, create spaces where we're not taking each other down, but we really are inviting each other in, and, like the work of your son, Tindy, the work that he's been doing with young men around the world has been phenomenal in terms of trying to create a space for men to actually talk about masculinity in ways
there's so much they could be doing. There's so much. Actually, just start a men's group and start talking about it.
Yeah. And that there's a lot of, that there is, that first of all, feminism is not just for women. It's a lovely little ideology that everybody is welcome. And it can be something that is joy-filled and fun. And so, we're going to...
It's only what men have already had for a very long time. It's not like it's some out there thing. It's just, it's equal rights. It's equality. It's not some weird thing that everyone, I don't want to say I'm a feminist. There's a whole patch of time when people didn't want to say they were a feminist, and I didn't understand what they were talking about.
Well, and I think as you said, if you think that power is about power over,
yes,
and then that if men see that they are losing power, the kind of feminine power that we are talking about is about building collective power, and that is much more inclusive. So, say that bit, that you think that kind of feminine power, how it can change the world. Tell us how you see it.
Well, it's about boundless curiosity as well. It's about actually being interested in other people. We're naturally very narcissistic human beings, but women, we have to take an interest, because if we don't, often we die. So we have to be we have to look all the time, what's going on. It's a survival technique, actually, but it's developed into this kind of extraordinary capacity to read the room. which we have always had to have.
Yeah.
But this is not only a survival technique, it's a kind of human great quality. So it's really inviting people into all of the emotions, because we all need to be able to access all of them, and we need to move away from saying that the softer so-called feminine emotions, such as vulnerability, such as caring, kindness, etc., are somehow soft options that belong only to the subspecies, and that the big tough strong things, no, actually, of course, that's nonsense. Everyone has everything inside them.
Right.
And so we need to connect to one another in all the ways that it's absolutely possible to do. And that is only, I think the real change happens through conversation.
Yeah.
I really do think that. Good conversation, face to face, eyeball to eyeball. And everyone can do that. Everyone can do that every day.
Well, actually, that's a perfect thing to wrap up on, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And just so beautiful to end on that note about healthy feminine and healthy masculine. Mm-hmm. And thank you for all that you do. And I hand it over to Vidya to take us out.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Joanna. What an incredible conversation, and allowing us a peek into your friendship as well. The themes of sisterhood, solidarity, showing up with vulnerability, and most importantly, our influence and power in this space. Thank you both so much for taking the time today. This concludes part 1 of our session. We hope you're finding it really engaging. As we've done in previous sessions, we'll now transition to part 2, a Zoom meeting, where we will engage in small group discussions to unpack today's content a little further. Please find instructions for transitioning on the slide and click on the link in the chat box. Should you have any problems, please stay in the webinar or call the number on the screen for technical support. Thank you again, and we'll see you in a few short minutes.